Hey guys, welcome to Now Less Debatable. This is your host, Fantastic Facade. I am joined with my trusty co-host, Triple A the Humanist, and today we have a very special guest by the name of Brady, who formerly was Phanatik of Cross Movement, a Christian rapper, former Christian rapper, that both Triple A and I listened to throughout high school and college. And kind of looked up to, who is now deconverted, much like the two of us, both former Christians, now atheists. So we're gonna have a discussion about morality and deconversion, and just kind of have a good free flowing talk and chat. Brady, I appreciate you coming on, man. This is pretty
Right.
cool.
Thanks for having me, man. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Yeah, man. So, Triple A's he's got his daughter there. He's gonna keep
Hey.
occupied. In the meantime, I'm gonna check this, and if
Okay, my
Triple
bad,
A's
man.
got no worries, you gotta send him that link if you don't mind.
Yeah, I did. I already sent it to
Yep,
him.
All
yep.
right,
I'm
Yeah,
cool.
posting it
so
now.
so now that's the bit of man. So yeah, I wanted to bring you up here to discuss morality. Morality, as big and important of a topic it is actually something that as a Christian, I never really put a lot of thought into because for me, and
Yeah.
was crazy is that even as a Christian, like I was a very at least I considered myself to be a very critical thinker. I was deep into theology. I was not only like deep into studying scripture. I would study, other texts. I would read like the all of the great Reformed thinkers. I was
Mm,
a huge student of Cornelius Van Til, but
mm.
morality was not something that I put a lot of thought into
Okay.
because I thought it was easy.
Right. That box was checked already.
You're right.
Yeah.
So wasn't much to
Thus
think
saith
about.
the Lord. Right. These are the
Boom.
these are the 10 commandments that God gave to Moses. And so, like, what else did they think about?
Right. Even like sitting in class when we and philosophy when we go into morality into ethics. I was went through this at a Christian school and I was
Mm.
thinking, what a waste of time. Why learn about consequentialism? Why learn about you
Uh,
see what church? It's already figured out. God,
mm,
easy, right? So when I dropped when I dropped religion, I it left a huge hole. We
mm.
didn't leave a huge hole. The hole had been there.
Right. It
I
exposed.
just
Yeah.
I was just realized it was there. And
Hmm.
so I like to know like at before you deconverted, how did you handle morality?
um, hmm. There's so many ways I could even begin to answer this question, but I think to streamline it, like you, I didn't ask very many questions about morality. I let Paul basically sum it up for me,
Mhm.
such that Israel had God's laws written on stone tablets, and then the rest of the world, all the Gentiles, we had God's law written on our stony hearts. And so,
Right.
even if you didn't have um, a manual to tell you here's what you should or should not be doing, the conscience could be your guide if what Paul says in Romans 2 is true, so that your conscience will excuse you. Why do you feel guilty when you do something that's quote unquote wrong? Well, your conscience has been informed by God. So I let the Bible.
Streaming. Hold on. Grib, I can't hear you. I think you're muted, dude.
I'm not muted now. Sorry,
Okay.
I lost you guys. I don't know what happened. It just said my internet connection went out for a second, so I don't know if it was just a glitch. But we're all back. Everything still should be going. Sorry.
Okay. So what I was gonna say was like I don't even see a coherent moral system.
Mhm.
I see an arbitrary list of shalls and shall not. So, like for me, a moral system, a moral framework,
Mhm.
it shouldn't be a list of everything that's right and everything that's wrong. I
Mhm.
should be able to look at certain principles and evaluate like new moral dilemmas I
Right.
run into and make decisions based off of.
Well, as a Christian, and I could very easily put that hat back on.
Mhm.
I'm sure you've heard, there are people who do that with the 10 Commandments. So the idea of not bearing false witness against your neighbor was really a legal situation, like not taking a legal case against your neighbor that's not true.
Mhm.
But you can get the whole idea of lying out of that. And so not bearing false witness against your neighbor becomes thou shalt not lie. You can extrapolate, those 10 commandments into other things. Not coveting your neighbor's wife, or not coveting your neighbor's land, not coveting your neighbor's, can become all kinds of thou shalt not covets. So there are ways to get there. You know what I mean? If you're creative enough.
Did you ever think there was like if as a Christian, did like contradictions seem to bother you, and like some of the commands versus
because I didn't really pay attention to the outside of the 10 commandments. Like when you start getting to the Deuteronomic codes and all those, I didn't pay attention to what kind of fabrics you should and shouldn't wear. I just would slap Jesus and the cross and the blood on. I ain't got to worry about all that.
Okay. All right.
One that did stress me a little bit was homosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
I did have a hard time thinking like, I know God knows what he's talking about. And yeah, I know God, made us to be a certain way, and, heterosexual sex is productive and reproductive, I should say. But I just had a hard time because I remember, if I could be just very transparent here.
Sure.
I remember the very first time I naturally got an erection when I brushed up against, I was on a school trip in 6th grade, and we were all getting off the bus at the end of the trip, and the people behind me pushed me up against the girl that was in front of me. I wasn't trying to be, freaky, and I just got pushed up against her. And it was the first time that I noticed I reacted to another human being's body. It was natural. It was unforced. And at some point in my Christian thinking about morality and homosexuality, I said, man, if that was natural for me, I didn't have to think about it. I didn't have to make it. And other people have the same kind of natural reaction to same-sex situations. I had a hard time saying that they were wrong because it was so, like I said, it was so natural. If that's natural for someone else to be same-sex attracted, I had a hard time saying that was wrong. And so that was the first time that I looked at morality in the Bible and said, I don't know. I don't know if that's right. I don't know if the Bible's right on that. So
when you first started to deconvert, did you ever think about before you even like fully left, when you were in the process of leaving, where you think about some of the implications of like your worldview that would have to change as a result? Like, were you thinking, okay, now I need to figure out how I'm going to ground morality? Did that ever come about?
Yes, but that was the last stage.
Okay.
The first stage, I hint around at this in almost every interview that I do, but the first stage was when I began to consider that the Bible is not true. Immediately I said, I had a Psalm 73 moment. He says, in vain have I kept my way pure. I was like, yo, I've been keeping myself from all these sinful delights for the last umpteen years. Like I said, and so before I even thought about grounding morality, I was like, well, shit, like can I curse on your platform?
Yeah. Let's go. Yeah.
I'm like, well, why am I keeping my way pure? Now, granted, I don't want to go out here catching STDs and, dying before my time or burdening myself with, but at the same time, I'm like, what I thought was right and wrong may have just been a good suggestions on, don't take another man's wife, or don't commit murder. But at the same time, it's not a divine command anymore. And so my last stage in deconversion, actually the last 3 chapters of my book, I asked the question, okay, well then what of morality? Because I got to figure that out. The book was my processing my deconversion. So that was the last stage. But before I got there, I just started, like, I don't even want to call it sinning anymore. I just started living my life without the Bible's moral code and testing the waters to see what am I okay with doing? What am I not okay with doing? And surprisingly, even before I figured out my moral code, I knew there were certain things that I would not do. And there were other things that I used to would not do that now I felt okay to do.
So now I like to know, like, what is your moral system now? And then how did you go about figuring that out? Now, also, before even we go there, I like to know, is it, would you fit into any box, like consequentialism, utilitarianism, like,
Yeah.
That way I can like start making assessments of your view before you even explain.
So I've never been formally trained in philosophy. I've never been formally trained in ethics, even though I wrote a curriculum and I teach a class called Hip Hop History and Ethics.
Mm-hmm.
I designed that course back when I was a Christian as a way to try to sneak my theology into secular education systems. So I was like using hip hop culture to drum up all these social scenarios to ask moral questions, philosophical questions, just to chance once or twice a semester sneak theology in. So now I'm having to rework all of that to try to say, well, damn, I'm not trying to sneak theology in anymore. What am I trying to sneak in? And so recently what I realized that what I want to sneak in is what has become my new moral code. And I didn't even know what it was. So I didn't listen to people like Sam Harris and Matt Dillahunty when I was deconverting. I became aware of them towards the end of my process, and I saw that they were talking about morality. But the kind of person that I am, I wanted to know what I think about it first before I listen to anybody else. I didn't want to be influenced by them and become one of their acolytes. Or I wanted to know what I thought. As I developed my system, then I felt free to go back and listen to them. And surprisingly, I don't say this to this is not cap. This is not me trying to make it seem like I'm more than I am. After I had developed my moral system, I started listening to these other people and say, yo, they're saying the same things I'm saying. And actually, in some cases, in the exact same words, which comforted me because I was like, oh, this just must be common sense. Like, once you stop depending on an ancient source, maybe it's just common sense to think these ways because we're saying the same things. So all that to say, if I was to put myself in a box, I don't like boxes because I don't think any box is a true container for what people are. This is why I think you come up with things like situational ethics, because a box is not really going to help you in every case.
Yeah.
So my moral system, I say, is it's first, I don't know if I could say first, but I think first it's humanism, and then hedonism.
So when you say humanism, like you're talking about like your moral value, like what you value above all else. Okay.
Yep.
But would you place like humans like above animals, or do you mean humanism as a placeholder for sentientism or something like that?
Well, see, that's once again, okay. I don't like the boxes because I think sentientism, yes, but if I had to choose, if you forced me to choose between humans and other sentient beings, I'm going to choose a human because I'm a human.
Okay.
So yes, humanism, sentientism as well, but yeah. So in my book, I talk about this three-strand cord of morality. The first strand is self-interest, and I'll work out why self-interest is a good thing, why self-interest is a natural thing and a good thing. Of course, using the word good, you have to ask, what do you mean by good? But why?
What do you mean by good?
Yeah, beneficial, productive, desirable. Those are
to what? Or to who?
Self-interest. So it's going to be to the self.
Okay, so
right.
So would you say that the basis is ultimately subjective?
Yes.
Okay.
I think we just happen to live in a world where we have a lot of subjects with similar or common desires. So subjectivity gets us a long way because of our commonalities, which is why sentientism fails for me, because at some point we don't have things in common with other species. And so, yes, it's subjective. I think it has to be. Even God's morality is subjective. It's not objective. God is the subject.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah. So yes, it's definitely subjective.
So I guess you fall in the camp of like moral anti-realist. You don't believe in like there is any objective moral standard.
So because you've studied this, you're going to help me put these in better categories. But I don't think there is an objective morality, but I do think there are objective standards. Like if we have a subjective goal, and these are ways that I start listening to people like Sam Harris, and I say, oh, we agree on that. or people like Alex O'Connor would say some similar things. If we have a subjective goal that's agreed upon, we can come up with an objective standard for how to reach that goal. Now, the goal could be subjective, but the standard can be objective. If we say well-being is a subjective goal, there are objectively better and worse ways to get there. So there can be objectivity even in the subjectivity.
Gotcha. So so we kind of agree.
Okay.
There's also some like this is some disagreement because I'm a moral realist.
Okay.
So I believe in objective moral standards.
Okay.
But not objective moral values. So as in there is.
So that's similar. Yeah, that's almost the same thing I'm saying in different terms.
Gotcha. Because in my systems, like I ground my system in well-being. Okay. And well-being consists of a lot of things. It consists of your health, your wealth. And when I say wealth, I'm not talking about being rich. I'm talking about access to resources, food, water, clothing, shelter. So health, wealth, happiness, security, freedom. There may be some other things, but everything that I can think of will fall into one of those categories.
Okay.
So, and all of those prongs make up what we call your experience. This is how you could measure your well-being. And so when I say an objective standard, so that objective standard is well-being. Whether you value well-being, that is totally subjective. Value in itself is going to be subjective. It's about what
I've got no qualms with what you just said there.
Okay.
I could easily take what I said and make it almost synonymous with what you just said.
Okay. All right. So yeah, so that's what I would consider moral realism. I guess sometimes moral realists we kind of differ. Like some of them go into objective moral values.
Right.
And I think that's oxymoronic. You don't have a objective value. Values are about what you find important. Then it's going to be subjective.
Now, why wouldn't someone say no? When we talk about moral realism, we are talking about the values and not just the standard. Why wouldn't that hold and take that away from you? So
I disagree. So when I say objective moral realism, I'm only talking about the standard.
Right, but I'm saying the broader conversation isn't the broader conversation about moral realism, the values, or are you saying no? We're free to disentangle those two.
Yes, we can disentangle them. So that's why in my system, I don't have any oughts.
Right.
So we had was arguing with an apologist on this channel a few months ago, and we were talking. Me or Fasad brought up the flood, and we talked about how God was immoral for that. And he was like, "Well, who are you to say what God should and shouldn't do?" And I pointed out to him, "I'm not saying what God shouldn't do. I'm not putting any oughts on it. I'm just saying what is. Flooding the earth is bad for well-being. Therefore, it's immoral. I didn't say that God ought not to do it. So he may not care about well-being, and the biblical God obviously doesn't. So if his ultimate value is his own glory, then maybe he ought to flood the earth. But it wouldn't be moral, not in the way I defined it. The thing that I'm talking about, that I call moral, there's no way that could be moral, because it's subjectively bad for your health to be drowned. It's just the way it is.
Okay. And I'm going to press this a little further because I want to be sure here what you're saying. Are you just taking the liberty to say, when I say objective, when I say moral realism, I mean the standards, not the values? Are you taking a liberty to say that, or are you saying no? In general, whenever the conversation of moral realism is brought up, what people actually mean is the standards and not the values.
I'll say I'm taking the liberty to say it because you usually the moral realists they would go as far and say that there are objective values, moral values, and like that's oxymoronic. That's like saying there's a square circle. A value is subjective, so it can't.
I like the conversation that you're sparking, because I'm like, one part of me says, why not just use the standard terminology and just say I disagree with that? But I think what you're doing is you're almost like reclaiming that territory, saying, no, I'm not going to allow you to say what I think is untrue. I don't think that moral realism can even apply to values.
It can't.
I like that. I like
it's
that.
A contradiction.
I get
It
it.
cannot be.
I
So,
hope
I mean,
people are
like,
following because I
right.
get what you're saying.
when we look
I
at like
like
the
that.
philosophical definitions of like moral realism, like if you just Google, it's like the theory that there are mind independent moral facts that humans can make claim about them that can be either true or false, right? If we take that at face value
Mm,
and we take the way that AAA, whatever you want to call them, is kind of applying this, and we take morals as like right or wrong, good or bad, etc., then nowhere in the definition of moral realism do you get value. It just doesn't happen. And I think that's a problem that, and I don't mean it in a bad way, but I think it's a problem that moral realists have, is that when you cross the line of trying to give something like value to something like a true or fact or true or false statement about a situation, and the with holding well-being as kind of like a standard in mind, then you can make true or false claims about that all day, and that is moral realism, right? So if you say that the object is well-being and drowning someone is bad for their well-being, then drowning someone is immoral, right? Doesn't say anything about the value that we just like the value you have on it or the values that you take on it. It's just this is a true or fact statement, mind independent, because the goal or the subject here or the object here is well-being. So we have this objective goal in mind, well-being, and we know just based on reality and how people react to certain things and how reality impacts with certain people, that if you hold them underwater long enough, humans will drown, right? That's just the way it is. So I think that when you're, from a philosophical standpoint, making the statement on moral realism, I think you have all rights to say that it holds the standard and it meets the criteria. It's just that you often get people that are more realists that try to then insert value. And I think that's problematic just for like the same reason that AAA was just saying, is that values by definition are going to be subjective. Because you hold something more valuable than I do. Like you hold your friends and family more valuable than I do because I probably don't know who they are. So they're strangers to me. Or I like my dog more than you like my dog, right? You know, like it's just I hold value higher for my dog than you would because it's not your dog. Like, it's just, like you
Well,
might
there's
love
another part of
dogs,
this
but-
that tell me how this fits into your system, because I try to get around it. I think I address it in an indirect way in my system. But isn't also part of this the question of authority? Because you could say the goal, subjective as it may be, is well-being, but why do you get to say that? Why do I have to respect that you set that as the goal?
Okay, so I don't bring it into authority at all. So look, no, you don't have to respect it. That's an axiological question. That's all about values. If you don't value it, it's just the way it is. And I can't make you value something. Like maybe I could point a gun at you and make you say that you value it, but you still don't value it. I can't control your mind. Now, and the reason why I don't bring in authority,
you kind of are forcing someone to value something there, which is part of their well-being, their livelihood.
I didn't catch the first part. What you said.
I said, although in an ironic sense, by pointing a gun at someone and forcing them to say they care about well-being, you are forcing them to actually care about well-being via their livelihood.
Yeah, right. But I was going to say, well, authority doesn't come in the picture because I'm basing well-being off the objective facts of reality. So I have my little girl right here. She's watching TV. I'm going to give her dinner later. If I were to give her poison, that would be immoral because it would violate her well-being. There's no authority that comes into play here. It doesn't matter that I have some authority over her.
But what if she doesn't value her well-being?
But if she doesn't value it, that's fine. But that doesn't change the standard. When I say well-being is the standard, I'm just making an analytical proposition. I'm just giving a definition of what I mean when I say the word well-being. And if she don't value it, that's fine. If I don't value it, it's fine. But according to that analytical proposition, giving her poison would be immoral. Unless the authority has the ability to change the literal facts of reality. then authority doesn't come into play. Like my authority
My
can't
authority does come into play in a sense because you're taking the onus upon yourself to set well-being as, and maybe you say no, it's axiological, so I'm not setting it, I'm just acknowledging it.
Yes.
But to say it, you kind of are setting it too. Because like I said, somebody who doesn't agree about well-being, like they may say, yeah, there's this propensity with something that propels us to want to survive, to want to, the self-preservation, but I can interfere with that propensity and I don't want to. And so I disagree with this idea of well-being. I don't think well-being is as good as
those
So,
are values.
right.
Yeah.
So,
But also, I'd like to point out
those
that,
are
like,
about values. You go ahead. What are you about to say, Fasad?
I was just going to say, also, I'd like to point out that usually, kind of at the beginning of a conversation, this is why we have these talks and we have these terms that we agree on. So we're not saying that, like, because I say so, well-being is the standard. We're saying if I am talking about morals, I mean the standard of well-being. So when I say something, I'm not, if you ask me on my general consensus of how I'm going to interpret information and data that's presented to me, I'm going to check it against the rule of well-being being the standard. Now, you don't have to value that or care about it or have the same goal in mind or object in mind, right? But that means that we're talking about fundamentally different things. Essentially, you can say, I value self-preservation above all else. And you can have that, and you can say anything that goes against that is immoral. Well, now we just have different terms that we need to use. And so we'll say, for the sake of argument, we'll use your definition, but that's going to change how I define something as moral or immoral, but on my normal basis of how I would define it.
I got you. The way that I don't know if I get around it, but the way that I address it is, rather than worrying about authority, what I do is it's sort of the same thing that you're doing, but I guess I don't use the term or even say that it's axiomatic. I simply draw attention to the tendency of living things to want to survive, and after surviving, thrive. And you talk about some of the same things you mentioned. We talked about thriving a minute ago, just freedom, creativity, access to all those kind of things. Living things, whether it be a plant, whether it be whatever it is, tend to want to survive, and not just survive, but to thrive, to not be confined or restrained from expanding and maximizing their potentiality. And so, yes, I guess I could say too, in my system, I'm saying it's just axiomatic, but I think it's probably more, I think it's beneficial to draw out why I'm able to say it's axiomatic. I think living things, when you look at any living thing, this is what they tend to do. And so to go against that, I feel like it's safe to say it's immoral to stop a living thing from surviving and thriving, because that's going against a life principle that is axiomatic. We don't know why we want to keep living. We don't know why that after living we want to thrive. Go ahead.
Follow me into this really absurd universe,
okay,
where people value destructive behavior. People value murder. People value stealing. People value rape and all that kind of stuff. So now people don't have a propensity to value well-being. They value the opposite of that. Are those things now good?
No, and I don't think those things would. It's not that they're not now good just because they value the opposite. I would venture to say that those people who value those things, they only value them in as much as they can do them to others. They don't value those things being done to themselves, because the principle of self is not going to want to be violated that way. It's not going to want to be harmed. It's not going to want pain and suffering. And so that's why self-interest.
My universe gets a little crazier now.
Okay.
Because people also value it being done to themselves.
So they're sadists.
Would it then be good? Well, I mean, we can use that word. I'm just saying they just value that stuff. Like I think so. Like even like the sadists, they take pleasure in pain, but this is still, that's just their form of pleasure. It's very odd for someone to take pleasure in what they would find unpleasurable.
Mhm.
And so that's why I was saying how absurd this would get. So they want what the in
I'm
a
sorry.
sense.
The sadist is the one who enjoys inflicting pain on others, not the one who enjoys
Oh, I'm
being
sorry.
the
I'm sorry.
masochist is what I was thinking of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. And
I had to look
so,
it up.
gotcha. In this world, people don't enjoy having those things being done to them. However, they still have a propensity to create an environment that's conducive to that.
You're saying the universe that you're talking about?
Yes.
They don't
It's
enjoy them things being done to them, but they
Mhm.
have a propensity to.
Yes. They have like some sort of evolutionary there's some sort of evolutionary mechanism that just like we're wired to want to not only to survive but also thrive. They're wired for the opposite. Would morals be different?
Help me understand the universe a little bit more. They're wired to produce a world that
is destructive to well-being.
To their own well-being. Then the Christian could jump in and say, yeah, see, that's our world. That's what sin does. We do things in our world that are not even in our own best interest. One of the things that I do in my system is I talk about self-interest is a complex thing because of the kind of creatures that we are, because we have a plethora of systems in our body. We've got the circulatory, we've got the blood system, we got the respiratory, we got all these different systems, we got things going on in our brains. We've got all kinds of different systems in our bodies that create competing interests. And so I may want food, but I also may want money. And those two interests can conflict with each other. So I may not even do what's in my own self-interest because I'm meeting one self-interest that's higher than something that I should rearrange those. What religion does is it comes in and it seizes on anything you do that's not in your ultimate best interest, and it calls it a propensity towards sin. But really, it's not sin; it's competing interests. So I got competing interests within my own self. Then I got my interests that compete with yours. I want this car. It's the last one on the lot. It's my dream car, but you wanted the same car. Now we got competing self-interests, right? I say all that to say the idea of a world where people have a propensity to do what's not in their own self-interest. At some point, you're not going to have that world anymore.
Oh yeah. It's going to destroy itself.
Right.
But before that happens,
yeah,
something like murder be moral, because is what people value. Because I guess what I'm getting at, like if we base morality on what people value, then it seems like if the values change, the morality could change.
Right.
And
yes, I think I can't really defend against that other than to say that's why either it's axiomatic or what I'm saying is I'm paying attention to how we operate because we're not that way. Now, maybe in other parts of the universe, it is that way, but I think, no, we really do have even if I'm doing things that are destructive to myself, I'm only doing it because I don't realize how destructive it is. I don't realize if I'm a drug addict and my addiction for this particular drug is competing with all my other interests. I'm not realizing, or I'm not paying attention to how destructive this one interest is to all my other interests. We are the kinds of beings that have these self-interests. However, our cells and DNA and molecules are coming together, they have an interest in not dying. They have an interest in multiplying and getting the nutrients that they need and reproducing and all that. Those are our interests. And so I do think if you find a world where they have different kinds of interests.
Could you say that world is immoral?
It's immoral according to our Constitution, yes.
Yeah.
That's the most I could say.
All right. I guess we're in agreement there.
Okay. It took a long time to try to say that, but I'm just trying to lay out just how it makes sense in my mind. I think I'm just going off of what we know we are.
What do you do with like some of the like topics like abortion? Because
Yeah.
this is
Oh
one thing.
man.
Like for some reason, like a lot of Christians
Hmm.
look again to atheism. They think we're all think alike. We're all
Hmm.
agree, and they think we're like a monolith. And really, it's like
Yeah.
we're not sheep. We're more like cats who kind of do our own thing,
Right.
right? It'd be like herding cats, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like if someone tells you they're an atheist, that really doesn't tell you anything else about their beliefs.
Mm.
And a lot of times I'll get messages sending me stuff about, why I should be opposed to abortion. And I've said very little about my
Mm.
position on abortion,
Mm.
but they just think I'm an
Except
atheist.
except
Yeah.
the
And so,
multiple podcasts that we've done on the subject.
oh yeah, we did. So I did defend abortion publicly sometimes. Maybe that's why.
Mm.
But anyway, so how do you handle like a topic like abortion,
Yeah.
where I guess we're competing interests, like as you were just talking about,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
or kind
Yeah. I talk about this, I think, chapter 13 or 14 of my book. I don't go into detail about abortion, but I name abortion as a good test case for this principle.
Mhm.
Because I do think in that case, you have those two competing interests, the interest of the mother and the interest of the unborn. It's not, there's no such thing as a cut and dry. I think the mother to be has an extremely difficult choice to make, because she has to be concerned about her own self-interest and the interest of another. And I don't know that I could tell that person, here's what you have to do in this case. I think the impossible decision gets a little easier when you're talking about a unborn fetus, developing fetus that is viable outside of the womb. If the fetus is not viable outside of the womb, I think, not that it's easy, it's a little easier for the mother to say, my self-interests are going to trump yours in this case. And she knows what those interests are. Now, once again, just like me, when I got to deal with my addiction to some drug versus, hunger, I have competing self-interest within myself. I may not do what's right for me. That mother may have competing self-interest before she even thinks about the unborn child. Matt Dillahunty says something that I like. He says, does anybody have a right to use your body in ways that you don't want your body to be used? Before you bring in an unborn child, just the principle of somebody else using your body, even if it's using your body to keep them alive, if you don't want to, does anybody have a right to make you do that? Generally, you would say no. No one has the right to do that. And then he says, so why are you giving special rights to this unborn child? Most people who are against, who are pro-abortion, pro-choice, have a hard time calling the unborn a child, because it just seems like if I say child, then that means I'm talking about murder. But the way he reframes it is, no, if a person, I give you that, but does any person have a right to force you to use your body in ways that you don't want? And so I think I'm
not even talking about rights here, because that goes more into, I guess, more legality.
Yeah.
Is it moral? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. I think there are things that are less moral and things that are more moral. So the 3-strand cord that I talk about is self-interest, the interest of others, and then the 3rd strand, when these two fail, is empathy. And so I think if somebody does something that is good for themselves, it is moral to a degree. But the person who widens their circle and does something that's not just moral, good for themselves, but takes into account the interest of others, because you realize that other is a self like you, and you take into account their interest, we consider that to be more moral. The person that does something that is empathetic, that goes beyond just, hey, this is, reciprocity, and I'm just looking out for the community, and I'm going to look out for y'all this time, y'all look out for me next time. But no, empathy that says, this may not even come back to benefit me. I'm just going to do this for you. Altruism. For whatever reason, we look at that and we say, man, that's even more moral. So I wouldn't say the person who has an abortion, it does something immoral. it might be less moral than the person that looks out for the interests of others.
Okay. So I like the challenge what you said earlier. You said it wasn't cut and dry.
Okay.
I think it is.
Okay.
I think it's cut and dry. It's immoral.
Okay.
Because if the standard is, and because like I value sentience, right? And
are you? I'll save my question.
Morality starts with sentience. Once something has the ability to experience, we have moral obligations to it, and at minimum to do no harm, right? And so now morality would apply to it. And now I'm pro-choice, just to be clear, right? Because so if the standard is well-being, and one of the things I consider is health, then it can't be moral to kill something that's sentient.
Can it be more? Now, you know, there's caveats to that, though. Can it be moral to kill something that's sentient if the sentient thing being killed is going to save the life of the mother? Can that be moral?
Nope.
Oh, wow.
It's a contradiction.
So her well-being is in jeopardy. She will die if she goes on with this pregnancy. And you still say, then she should probably just.
No. I'm not saying her ought. I'm not giving her ought. I'm not telling you what she ought to do. I'm just telling you what the standard is.
I understand how you're slicing that up there. I get what you're saying.
Now, so with morality, it can divide into moral acts can be divided in two categories, right? You have moral, you have immoral. You also have things that don't affect well-being at all. I consider amoral, like you're wearing a black shirt with a crown on it. Amoral, it doesn't affect anyone, right? But immoral acts fall into separate categories of their own: justified and unjustified. So let's say this, right? You and your, I don't know, like your niece or somebody, right? Is walking, like, let's say you have a niece who's a little toddler, right? Walking out of the grocery store outside of Philly late at night. Some dude pulls up in a van, tries to kidnap her. You punch the guy in the face to save her life from being kidnapped. You're immoral. You punch somebody in the face. It is not good for someone's health to be punched in the face. However, it is justified. Consider the context. You saved someone's life. You saved your niece. But like, if the standard is well-being and we're considering health, it will be a contradiction to say it's a logical contradiction. It violates a logical absolute. Is what I'm saying. It violates the law of identity. It violates non-contradiction. They call it moral for punching somebody in the face because it violates their health. Well-being can't be the standard if you're going to call something like that moral. Just like well-being cannot be the standard if you're going to say that aborting a sentient agent, whether it's a fetus or not, if you're going to call that moral, then well-being can't be the standard. But what you can do is you can say it is a justified immorality.
I'm not mad at that. I need to think about that some more, but I'm not mad at that. The idea of something being morality having degrees where things become more and more moral, that's sort of where I am. But the idea of saying it's immoral, but it's justified immorality, I'm not mad at that either. So, yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, because I say like self-defense falling in that. Like, I'm a pretty avid gun owner, and like it's primarily used to protect my family. And so, yeah.
So the question I was going to ask you is: are you vegan? Or are you? Do you eat meat?
Nope. So, I'm immoral.
No, but now here goes the other question.
Go ahead.
Is your eating of meat, is it justified immorality or is it just immoral? It's unjustified.
I think it's an unjustified immorality.
Okay, so at least you're consistent. I give you that.
Because I don't have to eat it to survive.
Okay.
And I think like as civilization advances, I think we're going to get to a point where we're able to produce our own meat. Like, you know, we're
doing it now.
Yeah, and you know,
we're doing it now.
Right, and people are fighting against that. They're like, oh, you know, it's weird and all that kind of stuff. I mean, if it's made of the same stuff, and we do scientific studies, make sure there's no adverse health effects, then I'm all for it.
Yeah,
if we can stop killing sentient life. Yeah. And still get a bacon cheeseburger. I'm all for that.
I'm going to have to listen back through this conversation because I want to think about some of this a little bit more. I haven't thought about that before, so I appreciate that. Yep.
Do you believe that life has like objective value.
Objective?
Yes.
I don't believe that.
Oh, I mean, it's inherent value. I'm saying
Inherent value.
Mhm.
I believe my life does. So,
Okay.
I grant to others that which I would claim for myself. So it's subjective, but I do think it's inherent. I inherently, from the time that I become, I don't even want to say aware. I think from the time that the cell divides and I start becoming a living thing, I have a interest even before before I'm aware of that interest. Um, my developing fetus, my developing embryo inside my mother is going to demand nutrients. Does that mean that there's an inherent value there? There's at least an inherent or a innate drive. So I'm going to look at that innate drive and say it develops into an inherent value. So
Okay.
yeah.
Just
Yeah, I
wanted
mean,
to
like
take a second if I
don't.
could.
Go ahead, Scott.
Just wanted to take a second if I could. Carol, thank you for sharing on the chat there. It's pretty long, but I just wanted to say thanks for sharing that. And Essence wrote a comment saying, this makes the case for morality as being less important in some circumstances. If you don't mind expanding upon that a
Elaborate,
little bit,
please.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just writing even if it takes maybe 2 comments instead of just one, because sometimes they're cut off for length on YouTube.
Can I?
But
Yeah, and just maybe I can help when she explains, because when you said this makes the case for morality becoming less important, like we're already bringing in values to it when we talk about importance, and I separate that. I'm not talking about values. I'm just talking about standards. So,
yeah, so if you don't mind,
whether you find something important is, I'm not concerned about that.
And Carol, no worries on the link
about
there. I just wanted to say, I took the time to read it. I don't know if you pay attention, but I'm kind of more the showrunner, and I've been talking a lot less than the other two, and that's fine. I'm fine with that role. So I was reading your comment on my phone just so I could, kind of take a second to take it in. And yeah, I mean, I think depending on your background, and I mean, I'll even for fun, real quick, just since we're doing the interruption, Brady. Carol said something along the lines that they were talking about to a family member that was religious, and they said they would feel like if they were like in an alley and they knew that the other people that were approaching them were religious, they would feel more comfortable than knowing they were not religious. Would you say that you still take that kind of stance, or would you say like you're going to feel the same no matter what the circumstances are?
Man, I heard somebody tell this story about somebody, I forget all the names, and some well-known person in England back in, I guess, the 1800s or whatever. This person made a comment and says, I'm not a Christian, but I hope that my maid is. Like, basically, if the person who's cleaning my house believes that there's an all-seeing eye watching them, then my possessions are safe in that case. And I think there's something to that, like hoping that the people in the dark alley are Christians. I get that. I hope they're moral. I hope they're humanists, because they could be a Christian who believes that God told them that they should kill whoever's in this alley.
Right, that's what I was gonna say. You're right.
Yeah.
Like if I'm walking in the alley, I tell you the safest I would feel. Like I wouldn't feel any comfortable thinking like if I'm walking in the alley and there's a group of guys, someone told me they're atheists, I'm not gonna feel any safer. If someone said that they're Christians or any sort of religion, if they said they were Jainists, I would be like, oh yeah, cool. Those guys, yeah, they can't harm any type of life, right? They drink water through a sponge, so they don't harm any bugs or whatever. So I know they're not going to touch me.
Yeah.
So sure, that would, in that sense, I would.
We should start a conversation online to asking women: would you rather meet in the woods a bear or a Christian?
Or a Christian.
See what we get in that case.
And Essence responded real quick, so let's try to address that since we're already broken up here. It says many theists often mention morality as being the crux of human existence, but it's clearly very nuanced, even as acknowledged by theists.
Yeah.
So Yeah, yes and no. So it depends on the theist you're talking to, I think.
Mm,
Especially when it comes to Christianity, because if you grew up like where I grew up in a free will Baptist community, and I would say that like they were really dead set on the concept of the relationship of God.
mm,
As I got into college and started right before my deconversion, I was like full on Calvinist. And I would say that like that form of Christian and Christianity, at least from my experience, is all about like God is in control of everything. So it doesn't really matter
mm,
as much as far as what I'm doing or saying. God is in ultimate control. So as far as what morality or you know my experiences there, it's just what God has to do, not what I can do or what I might do, because ultimately God is the deciding factor. So I will say that, like, yeah, there's a lot of talk about morality, and obviously, like, if you look at Christianity as a whole, generically, I think all three of us as former Christians would say that, like, when most Christians talk about morality in general, they're talking about sin and that Christ died for that sin, right? So like it's kind of washing away the sins of humanity, and that's what they refer to. So yes, in a very real sense, it's a very big crux for some people, but at the same time, there are sects of Christianity, there are sects of other religions and theists that have very little to say or do. And just like at the beginning of this conversation, you know,
mm.
when AAA was picking Brady's brain, like how did we take on morality as Christians? Well, the answer is we just kind of ignored it. We didn't think about it because we had the answer already. And if the answer is like whatever God says, that's you know that's just our agreed upon decision. Like we didn't really have to think for ourselves. And I think now that all three of us are in a state where we're atheist, and I'm not trying to speak for anyone else, it's just that it's obvious that from the conversation that we've had today and the conversations that I've had with AAA over the years, that
Mm.
now we're thinking about morality in
Yeah.
ways that we didn't have to before because we didn't just have a generic God card we could play.
Mm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
Did,
All the
did,
complexities come into play at that point.
did you have any thoughts on Essence comment, Brady?
No, I think, yeah, I think Fasad just nailed it. I think, I did initially, yeah, I initially agreed because I think in Christianity, things are a lot of times presented as very black and white. And you don't really, pull out the magnifying glass and look into the situation and see just all the different, connecting dots of what happens when you make this decision. I think about people who um, are being, I've got situations that I'm embarrassed about. Family members have told me counsel that I gave them back when I was a Christian. And I look at the counsel that I gave them, marriages that they should stay in because of it's godly and, it's ungodly to divorce. Um, yeah, there's not a lot of nuance for a lot of Christians. But I think the point that Fasad made uh, shows that there's even nuance to how you look at Christian morality. So,
Got you.
yeah.
No, first I'll do a time check. We normally go to about 7:30. Are you good for time?
7:30 is good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So now you had talked about black and white thinking that
Mhm.
that a lot of times Christianity throws over things, ignoring the gray. And you know what? I don't think black and white thinking is necessarily a bad thing, and because especially when it comes to morality,
Mhm.
like wouldn't you say if we're going to ground like any moral act, if we're going to ground it in the objective facts of reality, and that standard is well-being, and we're just looking at reality, we're looking at whether or not this act is or is not conducive to reality, like wouldn't that be black and white?
Yes and
On
no. That's
until
a
I'm
well,
gonna say
ontologically, yes, but then in the second layer, just like I've got the three chords of my moral, three strands of my moral cord,
mhm,
you've got a second tier in yours where you begin to talk about justifiable versus unjustifiable. So it may
mhm,
be black and white to be able to say, oh, somebody's harmed, that's immoral. What is not so black and white is it justifiable or unjustifiable?
right. And so, and you know, and so me and Fasad, we were talking about this earlier. We also talked about this on a podcast while we talked about, because a guest had asked, like, what is the standard for was justified? Now that gets super gray because like what moral and immoral, it's all ontological, but justified and unjustified, that's more epistemic, because it's about, like, it's about the knowledge that you may have at the time.
I was going to say that's where things like utilitarianism come in, where you start trying to figure out, well, what's the greater good here? How many people benefit from this? There's all kind of ways where it gets gray when you start, doing that.
Right. So even like, I mean, like, for instance, let's say, like, back to the scenario, you and your toddler niece are walking out of a 7-Eleven outside of Philly, and somebody's coming to kidnap them. And let's say, like, you have the lethal means, you can shoot them and put them down. But what if you know beforehand that you could beat them in a fist fight easily without resorting to lethal means? Well, in that sense, then using a gun would actually be unjustified immorality, because you didn't have to kill them. Like, you didn't have to use lethal force.
It gets grayer.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because there's no way to know that you could beat him in a fist fight. So you've already introduced.
I know.
You've already introduced the idea of having knowledge that you wouldn't normally have. So let's add more knowledge in that you wouldn't normally have. Let's say you know that if you beat him in a fist fight, he's only going to go on to kidnap more people. Now, does your lethal means make it justifiable?
Oh, okay.
So,
So let's think about this. Okay. All right. So I guess, what do you believe, and do you separate moral obligations from moral what's the word? What's that word that Plato used to separate the vices from the other one? What's the other one?
Virtues,
right? So in my system, I separate obligations from virtues.
Okay.
Right. And so I'll say something's a moral obligation, and I'll say something's like an obligation would be to not steal your stuff, because that's wrong.
But now
a virtue, go ahead. A virtue would be like, if I see you on the side of the road, you need help with money or something like that, I can help you, but I don't have to do that. With the scenario you're talking about, stopping someone who goes out, who's just going to go and kidnap more kids, I think we have to question, do I have an obligation to protect?
Well, in your system, there are no oughts, right?
No, they're not.
So
I'm not saying
obligation.
So no. So when I'm so I guess we gotta be super nuanced here. So when I say moral obligation, I'm not saying like you ought to fulfill the obligation. I'm just saying, like, if you do this thing, you are immoral. Like, you have to do this in order to be moral. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you ought to do it. So, like, when I say it's a moral obligation that you don't murder. Because if you murder, you're definitely immoral. That's just how it works. Okay. But for moral virtue, that would be something that you could not do, that you could not obey, and still be moral. Like,
I'm having a hard time. Maybe you may have already said it clear, but because I haven't thought about this long enough, it may just be unclear for me. I'm having a hard time separating moral obligations from oughts.
Yeah, probably because like the normative use of obligation implies an ought.
Yeah.
And so that's not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So like
maybe if I try a different way,
go ahead, Fasad.
So maybe if I try it a different way, because I think it may be I can try to clarify it. It may not work, but that's fine. It just means that I need to work on my clarification skills better. So when we're talking about a structure in which we're objecting, or our object is well-being, things that are moral obligations are only things that would be deemed moral. So you would do things that, if you do things that are obviously opposed to well-being, they would be against the system. Now, whether you care about those things or you value those things are still separate of whether they meet the standard that we've set, right? So if I do things like I steal from you, what I've done is I've violated your well-being because I've taken some of your wealth, right? So if I want to stay in line with the system of well-being, what I need to do is make sure that I am keeping well-being in mind when I consider whether I steal from you or not, right?
That's
That
the
doesn't-
obligation.
Yeah, that's the obligation itself.
Okay.
Now, whether I care about well-being or not is a whole different question. I don't have to buy into your system of, like, I don't have to care about morals or your moral system. But if I come to this table agreeing that when we say something is moral or not, we're talking about whether it's good for well-being, then what I've agreed to is that by looking at well-being and determining whether something is a net positive or net negative, we can determine whether it is moral or not. Whether I care about it or not, still a separate discussion. So when I say something is a necessitative way of continuing this moral conversation, then I could do things that would be good for well-being. And if I do things that are intentionally against your well-being, then what I'm doing is I'm violating the laws of the rules of that morality. So when we're saying that it's, in essence, it's not by force by any means. It's just that if you agree to these terms of morality and the goal is maintaining morality and doing moral things, then your object is the same as mine. And that's the well-being of sentient creatures. Versus if we look at it from just a perspective thing of like whether I value it, that's still a separate question across the table. Now, when it comes to something like virtues, there are things that I could do, like donate to charity, that even though, like, we would say, like, in most cases, that's a morally good thing in general, especially when we're looking at well-being. If you go to a homeless shelter and you feed homeless people and you're serving at a soup kitchen, you're giving up your time, you're giving up your money, you're doing these things, like, even though it partially degrades your own, by providing for others, you're increasing the well-being, right? That's a virtue. It's not something that anyone should say you're forced to do. We're not going to force you to go work at the homeless shelter, at the soup kitchen. However, if you did that, that would be a moral virtue. But if you went and started killing homeless people, then what you're doing is you're violating the goal of that moral system to begin with, which is their well-being.
Because I had an obligation not to.
To not harm them, correct.
Okay.
Yep.
I
But
think
it's-
you understand,
yeah,
you understand what I'm struggling with?
Yes,
Okay.
because the way that word is normally used, we're using it like in a
But
very
even in the way it was just
idiosyncratic way.
explained, that was a great explanation. I didn't get anything that was different than an ought from the explanation that I was just given.
Gotcha. All
Other
right,
than
so-
the use of the word force, but even in our context, we feel these, even outside of this discussion, the moral oughts that we feel, no one's forcing us to do them unless there are laws against them and we feel like, oh, I can't do that because I'm going to get arrested. But is the only difference between moral obligations, and oughts force? Is that the only difference, or what's the
Not
difference?
exactly. So
Okay.
let's say right here, immoral, moral, right? Now you don't have to value being on either side, right? But this is the line, and so I would say this is the obligation, right? So if you cross it, you're crossing the obligation. You don't. I'm not saying you ought to not do it. I'm just saying this is what. So when I say that there's a moral obligation to not steal, I'm saying there's a moral standard to not steal. I'm just saying there's a standard. So I guess so. Maybe that's would be a better way to say it. So when I'm talking about
it sounds like the word obligation is maybe not the right word. That you're getting more mileage out of the word obligation than I think it has.
Okay.
Because it seems like what you're saying is it's stronger than a moral sentiment, but it's
not a sentiment,
right?
Because I'm not basing it on a feeling,
right?
Because I'm just basing it simply just on a standard. Like if you do this thing, you are immoral. Period. And I'm not putting an ought on it.
It
so
sounds
maybe
like a moral commitment or moral. It's a moral something, but obligation seems too strong of a word for what you're saying. A moral acknowledgement, a moral there's a moral something there, but I'll go ahead with obligation. Now I understand what you're saying. I just think obligation is a strong term.
It helps
Yeah, no,
if you
I get it. Come here. Obligations imply. Did I freeze?
Yeah.
You
My back.
first,
Okay, I'm back. Okay, I'm back. But I was gonna say obligations normally imply some sort of value. Like when we talk obligations, duties, like this implies some sort of transcendent value a lot of times, right?
Yeah. I'm thinking about responsibility. I'm thinking about there's something that I think would say, at least to me, clearer what you're saying.
Perhaps you're looking at like
I
the
get what you're saying
categorical
now.
imperatives.
Okay.
What'd you say, Facade?
Perhaps you're looking
more
at like the
imperatives.
categorical imperatives.
That's
there we go.
better. Yes.
That's a way better word. I like that.
Yes.
I stole that
to
word.
Be moral.
That's my word.
This is what
You used that word from the beginning.
That's what I've been saying the whole time.
That's what I was searching for. Yes. So like you said, here's the line. To be moral, you need to be on this side of it. That's the moral imperative.
There we go. More
as opposed to the obligation. To me, obligation, that's ought. I don't. Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. So
go back to what you were saying.
You've been using that word from the beginning.
A
we
long
just heard, we all heard it
point.
wrong.
There was some dilemma that Brady had. Maybe like made my brain start turning. I don't know what it was. But
let me tell you what it was. I remember what it was.
Ahead,
if it helps, I remember what it was. Is you were talking about if you didn't, like, if somebody was going to kidnap someone, like in your family, you're out on the street, like you and your daughter were out on the street, someone tried to kidnap your daughter, and you knew you could take them in a fist fight, but you had a gun, but not killing them, but you knew not only would, if you didn't kill them, but they would go out and continue kidnapping people. And I think this is just a more nuanced way of asking, essentially, do you have a responsibility or imperative to kill Hitler? You know, that's just the question. It's just like, if given the opportunity, I know where you're going to morally say it lies, that it's a moral, like, it's immoral to kill Hitler.
Yes,
because killing anyone is wrong. But the question is, do you have like a moral, is it a moral virtue? Is it a moral imperative? Is it a moral obligation?
The question I was asking you was, is it justified or unjustified? Even if we have to say it's immoral to kill Hitler, is it justified or unjustified? And then it gets into the nuance of, all this gray about, you started talking about the virtue, the moral virtue versus the imperative. You asked me, do I separate those two? That was the question that you asked. Now that I understand, I don't think I separate the two. I think, and probably because I haven't thought about it enough, I think ideally, if there is a moral virtue, there is a moral imperative, and the two are not separate. But I also understand that the way that I live, there are very many moral virtues that I'm very fine with not being on the right side of.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I help a lot of people out. There are a lot of people who, come to me for money, help with, issues that they're having or whatever. And I see the virtue in helping. And sometimes I feel the imperative and other times I don't. I don't help every time that I can help.
Would you say you're immoral for not helping?
I don't know. Because that's when you get into the gray. Am I justified for, I have people right now in my life who I've helped many, many times, and they're coming back for more help. And in my mind, I'm justifying not helping this time. And I don't know that it's immoral to not help.
This is not to sway your opinion of helping other people or anything, but just my 2 cents on the matter of moral virtues and moral imperatives is that there is a undoubted number of ways that you could help people by self-sacrifice, but doing so is virtuous. I don't think that anyone, if you were a multi-billionaire, I still wouldn't look at you and say that you had to help everybody that came along. It's just not your responsibility. It's not your fault that people are in certain situations, even if it directly were your fault somehow. It's I would say I'd look at you as a person that helped so many other people and that has helped so many people, whether you're a billionaire or not. Like it just doesn't matter when you go out of your way to help people or give to charity or give your time or whatever you're doing to assist in other people, whether it's wisdom or whatever. Then what you're doing is being a more morally virtuous person. But I wouldn't say there is and we'll go back to using the word that we incorrectly misheard several times. I wouldn't say you have an obligation
Right.
to do it. I would just say that it would make you a much more virtuous person. And to like anyone that's out there that I'm sure, given the circumstances that we're all in, that we've all at least helped somebody somewhere at some time with some way. Doing that just makes us a more morally virtuous person. And if I refuse that in the future, it's not necessarily that I'm doing it out of cold-heartedness or out of self-interest or anything else. It's just that there are times in which my help is gone as far as I think it's going to go, and at that point I could be contributing to something making situations worse.
Yep.
And that could be my own self-detriment. It could be the person that I think I'm trying to help,
Right, enabling them
for
and
a
whatnot.
drug problem or whatever. And then at that point, but at any time I would say that it's not an obligation.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the categories that we worked our way through, and those are going to help me as I think more about this stuff in the future. So, yeah.
Has there ever been a time where a religious person, Christian or whatever, made a point about morality, and you thought, maybe I do need God?
No.
Yeah, me neither.
I mean, you see me on Facebook. I'm very active.
Yeah.
I've had for the last going on 2.5, going on 3 years now, since I deconverted publicly, almost daily conversations with believers on my page, and not once, whether they were asking for the ground of my morality, whether they were asking for my presupposition, or not once did any of them make a point that made me feel like, damn, I need to think about that. Not once. And that's not me being arrogant or anything. I just, no.
Same.
Yeah,
Same. Honestly, like for the most part, like it comes down, like even like when we have people on and they're arguing against me, it's mostly comes down to misunderstandings. I remember like there was this one time we had I guess who's been on several times, really smart guy, but he was talking about how humanism led to the Holocaust, because I was talking about how in order to be humanist, you just have to put humans at the center of your axiological framework. If humans are the center of your value system, cool, you're humanist, period. That's it. But it doesn't demand any specific moral system. And he was talking about how Hitler just took humanism to an extra step, because it led to the Holocaust. His axiological framework was, for him, the center was race. And I was like, well, that's not humanism. Right. That's racism. You're not valuing humans anymore. You're valuing race. That's a different thing. So
I've gone back to listen to people like Ravi Zacharias and C.S. Lewis and, all these people that I thought were such great thinkers when I was in the faith. And I look at them now like, what the hell did I see in this guy? Like, the logic that believers use, that I used as a believer, I'm embarrassed of. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting to kind of go back and look at like the way you used to think and like the mental gymnastics that people take now to defend or try to hold to some of those frameworks that you're just like, ask them a simple question like, hey, are you pro-slavery? And then all of a sudden there's just like this, well, at the time everybody had slaves and God, was just granting people freedoms that they didn't have and give them a place to go. And like all of a sudden the excuses come out and you're just like, dude, there's not a single humanist I know that if I walked to him and asked him, like, how do you feel about slavery? There's no one that's going to take more than a second to say it's wrong. Like, it's just like, it's baffling to me to watch Christians do mental gymnastics and backflips over this.
Yeah.
So can I ask, with your deconversion, if you don't mind, and it's not like super personal, it's just that like both AAA and I have experienced it because we both happened. Do you get a lot of people saying like, "Oh, what bad happened to you? Like, what is the like, did you just, God let you down kind of thing?" Because like we got that, so we get that so often from like Christians, and like it's not a, there's never a person that's come up and asked me like, so like, did you sit down and like analyze your own thoughts and like come to this conclusion rationally, which is what I did. It's more like
Right.
what bad happened in your life that led you away from
Yeah.
God.
Yeah, it's very paternalistic. It's very condescending. People don't give you the benefit of the doubt for being a person with your own thoughts and your own, your own inner world. I get that every once in a while from people who they need my reason to be unreasonable so that they can feel secure in their own continued faith. So if they can chalk my unbelief up to church hurt or, you know, my education led me away from whatever it is. I get that every once in a while, but very few people, because I'm very expressive about what led me to begin questioning the faith. And never once have I put it on some kind of disappointment, some kind of hurt. I was very happy in my Christian life until I realized that the Bible was, revisionist history and propaganda. And until I realized that, I was very happy in my Christian life. So people they did see me before anybody knew that I was deconverting. I did voice some of my concerns with the events of 2020, maybe even a little bit before then, with the whole Black Lives Matter thing and the way that Christians were
Oh yeah, you know what? I saw you because I saw you listed in a few videos. They'll put you and Lecrae in the same box. They're talking about progressive Christians, and they're like, "Why progressive Christianity Christians deconvert?" And it had, like one thumbnail had your face plastered all over the video. I was like,
really?
"Oh, like this is so dumb." You can just go watch his video talk about him deconversion. It wasn't because police get shooting people, bro. Like you're so dumb. But
wow.
You had said, but in that video, it was one thing I wanted to ask. You had said that at one point you talking about how like you understand the gospel, you just don't believe it. But you said the gospel and the way it's presented, you still find it beautiful.
Yeah, somebody brought that up on my page very recently,
and
I was like, "Damn, did I say it like that?" What they said on my page recently was they quoted me incorrectly, saying, "I still love Christianity, and I still love Christians." I do still love Christians, but what I said in the video was, I said something to the effect of, I still love the gospel, or I still think it's a
beautiful. I think you said you think it's beautiful. I mean, and that's the thing. Like you could have thought that at the time.
Yeah.
Years of skepticism, be like, oh, never mind.
So yeah, I think I have progressed past that point. At this point,
So for me to be black and white here, I think it is ugly, and I think it's the way it's presented is objectively immoral.
Yeah,
it is not in people's best interest to burn forever in hell. That's just
yeah. I think what part of me saying that at the time, if I'm honest, it was to soften the blow of what I was actually saying in that video. But to a degree, that was 2.5 years ago. There was something about it that I did still love. I still think it was what Paul did and the other New Testament writers behind him. What they did was they recreated Judaism to make it palatable to non-Jews. And telling that story the way that they did, I think there was something ingenuous about it. I think there was something just very clever and very like, it's a heartwarming story that God came up with a way to, rather than punish sinners, made himself or his son a sacrifice. I think it's a clever innovation to Judaism. And that's sort of what I meant when I say I still love the gospel back in 2022. I still think there was something important about what Paul did. The further away I get from that time, I'm able to say I don't love the gospel. No, I just think it was great fiction. I think it was great fan fiction.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love Star Wars. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm a big fan. Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And if you could do this in like in the, I guess the last 8 minutes, I wish we had more time to devote to this, because like I guess we'll have to get you back on. I like to go more into, you had said like you went into presuppositionalism, and while you were in seminary, and you said that kind of led you away from the faith. And can you give like maybe like a brief explanation of how that happened? Because I experienced kind of the same thing. But
yeah,
also same.
Well, tell me if this is what you guys experience. On my podcast, we did a 2-part series on presuppositionalism. There's a 3rd part that I've yet to edit. But I was at Westminster Theological Seminary, which is where, all this stuff comes out of. You talked about Cornelius Van Til and reading all his stuff. I just remember being in seminary thinking, how is this not circular reasoning to posit at the beginning of the discussion the thing that you want to end at, and you're not even going to establish that thing, you're just going to assume that thing. And because you assume this thing, and you're so it's almost like, instead of pulling the rug out from under your interlocutor, you're trying to slip the rug under your interlocutor and make your interlocutor be standing on the same rug that you are. It just seemed very dishonest to me. And because I held these Westminster, heads in such high regard, I just found myself saying, "This is the best you got. Like this is your judo move. Like this is your super. Here's how you got them in the hole that they have to submit." It just seemed like, if that's all you got, yeah, you don't have what I thought you had. And so I just found myself very disenchanted by what I found to be a dishonest debate tactic.
When I was reading Defense of the Faith for the first time, and like I was like, to me, like this was like deep to me, and I was a junior in college, and I was having problems with the circularity, and I didn't understand why you couldn't just insert anything into that circle. Like I was like, why can't? And I didn't see in his writings where he explained that. And I watched a bunch of Greg Bonson debates, some of his speeches. I never saw any explanation. And I looked all over a bunch of articles. I was like, has no one ever answered this? I mean, maybe you know of one, but I haven't seen any explanation.
Well, they do try to explain it in a way that I never really appreciated, but they try to explain why the triune God of Christian theism is the only thing that could fill that hole. Because this triune God has these attributes. You talk about the problem of the one and the many. You talk about all these different philosophical issues that the Trinity happens to address. But it still, for me, ends up seeming just very arbitrary.
And that's, we gotta get you back on, because those explanations that they give you, I think they can be broken down to the logical absolutes.
Yeah.
And so you can get rid of everything else, and you can just have the logical absolutes. And there's your grounding. And I wouldn't even say it's circular. I would say it's just my presupposition. I start there. So I start with well, we don't have enough time to jump into it.
Well,
it's like,
let's come back on this one. Sure.
Yeah. But man, did you have like any thing that you want to shout out? Your podcast?
Yes, Ichabod on YouTube. ICHAPOD. Check me out on Ichabod. Me and I have co-host Jay Witt and Albert Kim. I do Life After Faith videos with folks. You're in one of them. I haven't edited it yet, but just having fun, just putting content out to help other people realize and feel like they're not crazy if they're questioning their faith. So, and I have a book, Let There Be Gaslight, where I process why I left the Christian faith. I go through issues in Genesis, and I go through science of evolution. I go through ancient Near Eastern writings and all that kind of stuff, and just process my way out of the fake. So
Awesome, man. Well, like, Fasad, did you have anything you want to say?
I did not. Thank you for coming on, man. It's a pleasure.
Yes.
Pleasure. Great conversation. I
Not the
enjoyed
way
myself.
I anticipated meeting you, if I ever did, but I will say that it was still a wonderful conversation and just kind of good to have a conversation and go back and forth with you and pick your brain, man.
Good stuff. Good stuff. I look forward to the next one.
Really appreciate it. Well, I think that's it for us, guys. Go check out Icopod. Go check out Brady. No longer Phanatik, but Phanatik.
Exactly.
And we